The dim overhead lights flickered slightly, casting long, wavering shadows across the cold concrete floors of Evergreen Animal Rescue. It was late, past closing hours, when the shelter was at its quietest, or rather, as quiet as it ever got. The distant echoes of barking dogs filled the corridors, some barking out of excitement, others out of loneliness. The sounds were a mixture of hope and despair, voices that no one really listened to anymore. At the far end of the hallway, past rows of metal kennels lined up like silent prison cells, lay two figures huddled together in the last enclosure: Duke and Bailey. Duke, once a proud and powerful German shepherd, had the unmistakable air of a warrior whose battles had long since ended. His coat, once thick and full, had thinned with age, patches of gray creeping over his muzzle and down his legs. His body, stiff with arthritis, barely allowed him to move, but his eyes still carried a sharpness, a quiet dignity that refused to fade despite the years. He was old, but he was still Duke. Beside him lay Bailey, a golden-colored Labrador Retriever with eyes as soft as the evening light. She had always been the gentler of the two, the one who nuzzled Duke when the pain in his joints was too much, the one who curled beside him in the cold of winter nights. Unlike Duke, she had no visible scars, no signs of past battles fought, but her struggle was no less severe. Her breathing came in shallow, uneven rhythms, her heart struggling against the weight of time. They had been here for 7 years. 7 long years. For dogs like them, a shelter was not a temporary place. It was the end of the road. Puppies and younger dogs came and went, tails wagging, eyes bright with the promise of a new home. But Duke and Bailey remained. The old ones always did. Once, people had stopped in front of their kennel, admiring Bailey's soft fur, marveling at Duke's noble posture. But then they would ask their age, and that was always the end of it. Nobody wanted an old dog. In a shelter that was constantly overcrowded, space was precious. Resources were stretched thin, and hard choices had to be made. And for dogs like Duke and Bailey, choices were rarely in their favor. At the other end of the hallway, Dr. Lauren Carter stood in the soft glow of the reception desk, a clipboard in hand. She had worked at Evergreen for nearly a decade, and yet she still hated this part of her job. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edges of the clipboard. The list in front of her was short, but its weight was unbearable. Tonight, she had to make the decision. Lauren sighed, rubbing her temple before looking toward the kennels. She knew every dog in this shelter by name, by the way they wagged their tails, by the sound of their bark. And she especially knew Duke and Bailey. She had been here the day they arrived. Duke had been found wandering near an abandoned industrial site, his ribs visible beneath a malnourished coat. He had been wary at first, unwilling to trust the hands that tried to help him. But Bailey had been different. She had been discovered alone by a highway rest stop, trembling, waiting for what nobody knew, perhaps for someone who would never return. Over time, something had drawn them together. An unspoken bond had formed between them, something deeper than mere companionship. They were a pair, always together, always watching out for one another. And now, after 7 years of waiting for someone who would never come, their time had run out. Lauren exhaled deeply, forcing herself to push away the emotion creeping into her chest. She had done this before. Many times. It never got easier, but she had learned to compartmentalize, to remind herself that it was necessary. But then, why did this one feel different? A voice broke through her thoughts. "You don't have to do this, you know." Lauren turned to see Eric, her assistant, standing a few feet away. He had been cleaning the kennels earlier, but now his gaze was fixed on Duke and Bailey's enclosure. There was something heavy in his eyes, something she didn't often see in young shelter workers. Genuine sorrow. "I don't have a choice," Lauren said softly. Eric looked down, running a hand through his dark hair before sighing. "They've been here longer than I have. Feels wrong." Lauren didn't respond immediately. It did feel wrong, but it was also reality. She took a step forward, slowly making her way down the dimly lit corridor, her footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. As she reached the final kennel, she hesitated, her fingers resting on the latch. Inside, Duke lifted his head slightly, his deep brown eyes locking onto hers. There was no fear in them, no confusion, just quiet understanding. Beside him, Bailey stirred, her ears twitching at the sound of approaching footsteps. Lauren swallowed. They knew. She had seen that look before. It was the look of dogs who understood their fate, who had seen too many others leave before them and never return. She felt the weight of the clipboard in her hand like an anchor, pulling her down. She hated this part. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the door, and then she stopped. Her heart clenched as she realized what she was seeing. Duke and Bailey weren't just lying beside each other. Duke had curled his large frame protectively around Bailey, his front leg draped over her body, in what could only be described as an embrace. A true, deliberate embrace. Lauren froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had worked with animals her entire life, had seen dogs grieve, had seen them form unbreakable bonds. But this was something else. They weren't just huddling for warmth, they were saying goodbye. And suddenly, Lauren knew she couldn't do it. Her grip on the clipboard loosened as she whispered, almost to herself, "Not tonight." Then, with a new sense of urgency, she turned to Eric. "Bring me the microchip scanner," she said, her voice firm. Eric hesitated. "We've scanned them a dozen times before. There's nothing there." "Do it again," Lauren insisted. Something deep in her gut told her there was more to this story than what they had always believed. And she was about to find out exactly what. Lauren Carter had done this before, more times than she cared to count. The weight of the clipboard in her hand was nothing compared to the weight pressing against her chest as she walked slowly down the corridor. The list of names was short tonight, but that didn't make it any easier. She told herself, like she always did, that this was necessary. The shelter was over capacity. The funding was stretched thin. Decisions had to be made. But as she approached the last kennel on her list, a tight knot formed in her throat. Duke and Bailey, the old German Shepherd and the aging Labrador, had been here longer than any other dogs at Evergreen Animal Rescue. 7 years. 7 years of waiting, watching younger, healthier dogs leave while they remained behind. No one wanted the old ones. Lauren stopped just outside their enclosure, her fingers tightening around the clipboard. She had seen Duke and Bailey every day for years, but somehow, in this moment, they looked different. Duke, once a strong and imposing figure, was now thin and stiff from arthritis. His once vibrant coat had dulled, patches of gray creeping across his muzzle like whispers of time. Bailey, ever the gentle soul, lay curled beside him, her soft golden fur pressed against his side. Her breathing was uneven, a subtle but constant reminder that her heart was failing her. Lauren took a slow breath and forced herself to move. She reached for the latch, swallowing down the lump in her throat. Then she stopped. Her breath caught. What she saw made her chest tighten, made her heart hammer against her ribs in a way she hadn't felt in years. Duke wasn't just lying next to Bailey. He was holding her. His large, worn body was curled protectively around her, his front leg draped over her small frame in a way that could only be described as an embrace. His muzzle rested gently atop her head, his eyes half closed, as if shielding her from what was coming. And Bailey. She wasn't just lying there. She had tucked her head into Duke's chest, her eyes barely open, her body relaxed in a way that should have been comforting. But it wasn't. Because it wasn't just rest, it was acceptance. Lauren felt her throat tighten. There was no whimpering, no struggle, no fear. They knew. They knew what was coming. She had seen dogs react in all sorts of ways when their time came. Some were scared, their eyes darting around in confusion as they were led away. Others were blissfully unaware, wagging their tails, trusting the humans who had cared for them. But this was different. Duke and Bailey weren't afraid. They were saying goodbye. A slow exhale escaped Lauren's lips. Her fingers trembled on the latch, and for the first time in years, she hesitated. This was just another name on the list, just another part of the job. So why did this feel so impossible? She blinked rapidly, trying to shake the weight in her chest. Maybe it was because they had been here for so long. Maybe it was because she had seen them grow old together, leaning on one another through every passing season. Or maybe it was something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. The air in the room felt heavier now, as if the moment itself was holding its breath. Lauren's pulse thudded in her ears as she took a slow step forward. Duke lifted his head slightly, his deep brown eyes locking onto hers. There was something in them, something that made her stomach twist. It wasn't fear, it wasn't sadness, it was trust. A quiet, unwavering trust. A trust that she wasn't sure she deserved. Her grip tightened on the clipboard. She had a job to do. But she couldn't do it. Not like this. Her feet refused to move, her body frozen, as if the moment itself had anchored her in place. Then, without fully realizing what she was doing, she turned. "Eric," she called, her voice quieter than she intended. Her assistant was standing at the other end of the corridor, watching in silence. He had stopped working minutes ago, captivated by the same sight that had left Lauren breathless. Eric was young, but he had been here long enough to know how things worked. Still, his eyes were red-rimmed, his throat visibly tight. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lauren exhaled sharply, shaking her head as if trying to clear her thoughts. "Bring me the microchip scanner," she said. Eric hesitated. "Lauren, we've scanned them a dozen times before. There's nothing—" "I said do it again." Her voice was firm now, leaving no room for argument. Eric didn't ask any more questions. He disappeared down the hall, and for a brief moment, Lauren was alone again. She turned back to Duke and Bailey, swallowing hard. Duke was still watching her, his expression unchanged, his body still wrapped around Bailey like a silent promise. And Lauren couldn't breathe. She had always thought she had built walls around herself, strong enough to keep her emotions from interfering with her job. But this moment shattered them. She reached out a hand, hesitating for only a second before pressing her fingers gently against Duke's head. His ear twitched slightly, but he didn't move away. Bailey stirred just enough to nuzzle deeper against him, and Lauren felt the familiar sting of tears burning in her eyes. She had never seen anything like this. This wasn't just two dogs seeking comfort. This was something deeper, something stronger. And she wasn't about to let it end like this. Eric returned moments later, the scanner in his hand. Lauren took it from him without a word. Her heart pounded as she knelt beside Duke, pressing the scanner to the base of his neck. A single beep echoed in the silence. Lauren glanced down at the screen. Her breath caught, her stomach dropped, and in that moment she knew she had almost made a terrible mistake. She looked up at Duke and Bailey, her fingers tightening around the scanner. Then she stood, her decision made. "Not tonight," she whispered. Then, without another word, she turned to Eric. "We need to call the military, right now." Lauren's hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. She gripped the microchip scanner firmly, pressing it against Bailey's neck first. A soft beep echoed through the quiet shelter corridor, followed by the faint glow of the scanner screen. The familiar text appeared. Bailey. No owner found. Near a military base. Lauren exhaled slowly. She had expected this. It was the same result they had seen a dozen times before. Bailey had been picked up near an abandoned highway rest stop, not far from a decommissioned military site. But there had never been any records to indicate that she had belonged to anyone before arriving at Evergreen. She swallowed and turned to Duke. The German Shepherd watched her, unmoving, his body still curled protectively around Bailey. His deep brown eyes met hers, unreadable but knowing. She pressed the scanner to his neck. A single beep, then another. Lauren frowned. The screen flickered strangely, then the text changed. Her breath caught as bold letters flashed across the screen. Duke, K-9 Unit, U.S. Army, classified. Her fingers tightened around the scanner. This wasn't right. This couldn't be right. Behind her, Eric leaned in, his eyes widening. "No way," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "No way. We have a hero sitting in front of us and we never even knew." Lauren's mind raced. A classified military record? In all her years at the shelter, she had never encountered anything like this. Dogs with past owners, sure. Strays with forgotten histories, all the time. But a military working dog? Her pulse quickened as she scanned Duke again. The same message reappeared. There was no mistake. She looked down at him. Duke hadn't moved. He didn't react to the scanner or the stunned expressions on their faces. He just watched, quiet, patient, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Eric grabbed his phone. "We need to call someone. The military that—" Lauren held up a hand, her thoughts still reeling. "Wait," she said. She turned back to the computer at the reception desk, pulling up the shelter's records. Duke had been brought in as a stray 7 years ago. No microchip data had been found back then. At least, that's what they thought. But what if? She clicked through the records, scanning every note, every detail. And then she saw it. A small entry from the day Duke was admitted. Microchip detected. No data retrieved. Lauren's chest tightened. They had scanned Duke before. The chip had been there all along. But for whatever reason, the information had been unreadable at the time. The system must not have been able to access classified military records. And because of that, Duke had been labeled a stray. Forgotten. Eric's voice was urgent. "Lauren, this means he had a handler. He had a purpose. He wasn't just another abandoned dog. He was a soldier." Lauren barely heard him. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she accessed a broader database, searching for connections between military K-9 records and Duke's chip. Then she found it. And what she read made her stomach drop. Duke and Bailey hadn't just been military dogs. They had been a team. Their last recorded mission had been overseas, in a combat zone. Duke had been leading a patrol, sniffing out explosives, when an ambush occurred. The records were vague, redacted in several places, but one detail stood out. Duke had been injured. Badly. He had taken a hit protecting Bailey. And then somehow they had disappeared. Lauren's throat tightened. According to the military, Duke and Bailey had been declared missing in action. Presumed dead. No one had ever come looking for them because no one knew they had survived. For 7 years, these dogs, these soldiers, had been lost in the system, reduced to nothing more than nameless strays in an overcrowded shelter. Lauren felt a rush of nausea. She had almost euthanized them. She had almost ended the lives of 2 war heroes without ever knowing who they were. She turned to Eric, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were never just shelter dogs," she said. "They were never forgotten, just lost." Eric stared at the screen, then back at Duke and Bailey. 7 years, he murmured. How did they even survive? Lauren didn't know. But as she looked at Duke, at the way he still kept Bailey close to his side, she realized she didn't need to. They had survived because of each other. Duke had protected Bailey in combat, and when they were abandoned, left to fend for themselves, she must have done the same for him. Lauren's chest ached. They had given their lives for others, and in return they had been discarded. She wasn't going to let that happen again. With renewed urgency, she grabbed the phone and dialed a number she never thought she would need: the nearest military base. As the line rang, she glanced back at Duke. He was still watching her, his expression calm, unwavering. He knew something had changed, and for the first time in 7 years, there was hope. Hope that this time, someone would finally remember. Lauren gripped the phone tightly, pressing it to her ear as the line rang. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She had never made a call like this before, never had to fight so hard just to get 2 dogs a chance at life. "Come on, pick up," she muttered under her breath. The shelter's fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, their dim glow making the atmosphere feel even heavier. Down the hall, Duke and Bailey remained curled up together, unaware of the battle being waged on their behalf. Finally, the line clicked. A deep, authoritative voice answered. "This is Sergeant Mitchell, United States Army. Who am I speaking with?" Lauren exhaled sharply. "This is Lauren Carter, Evergreen Animal Rescue. She hesitated, glancing down at the clipboard in her hand. "I think I have 2 of your dogs." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Explain." Lauren's words tumbled out in a rush. "We just scanned a microchip on one of our senior dogs, Duke, a German Shepherd. His record came back classified, U.S. Army K-9 unit, and his companion Bailey was found in the same area. I believe they were part of the same team. I believe they were lost." Another pause. Then the tone in Mitchell's voice shifted. Sharper, more focused. "Are you certain?" Lauren swallowed. "Yes, but..." A new voice cut in from behind her, cold and unyielding. "That doesn't change anything." Lauren turned to face Mr. Patterson, the shelter's manager, standing with his arms crossed. He was a middle-aged man with a graying beard and the kind of detached expression that came from years of making tough decisions. "You don't understand," Lauren insisted, clutching the phone. "These dogs..." "I understand perfectly," Patterson interrupted, his voice clipped. "But do you understand what we're dealing with here, Doctor? Carter?" He gestured around them. "We are over capacity, we are underfunded, and these 2 have had their time." Lauren's jaw tightened. "They aren't just stray dogs, Patterson. They're war heroes."
Patterson gave a tired sigh. "I don't care if they sniffed out bombs for the president. Right now they are 2 old, sick dogs taking up space that could go to younger, adoptable animals." He nodded toward the clock on the wall. "If we don't get official confirmation from the military within the hour, I'm moving forward." Lauren's stomach dropped. "You can't do that," Eric interjected, stepping forward. His usually calm voice had an edge to it now. "You can't just ignore this." Patterson's gaze was flat. "Watch me." Lauren turned her back on him, forcing herself to focus on the phone call. "Sergeant Mitchell, we don't have much time. My boss won't delay euthanasia without confirmation. Mitchell muttered something under his breath, then, I'll check our database immediately. If this dog is who you say he is, I'll have someone there before that hour is up. Lauren's heart leapt. Thank you. Dr. Carter, Mitchell's voice turned firm, if Duke really is one of ours, you do not let anything happen to him. Do you understand me? Lauren felt the weight of his words. She nodded even though he couldn't see her. Understood. As she hung up, Patterson shook his head. You're wasting your time. Lauren's hands clenched into fists. She had always respected him, despite his blunt approach. He had been at this job longer than she had made more of these impossible choices than she ever wanted to. But today she would not let him win. I'm not wasting time, she said, her voice steady. I'm saving lives. Patterson smirked. You better hope that confirmation comes through then. Lauren turned to Eric. We need to stall. Eric nodded, already moving. I'll take them out for a walk. By some time. Patterson narrowed his eyes. You have 56 minutes. After that, it's out of your hands. Lauren didn't look back. She refused to let them die. Not like this. She marched toward the kennel, her mind racing. All they needed was time. And for the first time in 7 years, Duke and Bailey might actually have a fighting chance. Lauren checked the time again. 5 minutes left. Her hands were clammy as she gripped the edge of the reception desk, eyes flicking between the ticking clock on the wall and the shelter's front entrance. Eric stood nearby, bouncing his knee anxiously. Even Duke and Bailey, despite their aging bodies, seemed restless in their kennel, sensing that something big was happening. They had stalled for as long as they could. Sergeant Mitchell had promised someone was coming, but if they were late, if Patterson followed through on his threat, Lauren refused to finish that thought. Then suddenly the heavy sound of tires screeching to a stop outside made her heart leap. A moment later, the door swung open with force and a tall, broad-shouldered man in a military uniform stepped inside. His presence alone was commanding. His sharp features, the firm set of his jaw, the insignia on his chest signaling authority. Sergeant James Miller. Lauren exhaled sharply, stepping forward. But Miller wasn't looking at her. His sharp gaze scanned the shelter, searching, and the moment he spotted Duke and Bailey, everything about him shifted. His shoulders stiffened, his face, composed just moments ago, now showed something raw. Recognition. I'll be damned, he muttered. Behind him, 2 other uniformed officers followed, carrying equipment, probably scanners, Lauren realized. But Miller didn't seem concerned with protocols at that moment. His attention was fixed solely on the 2 dogs before him. Duke lifted his head, his aging frame struggling slightly, but his ears perked, his deep brown eyes locking onto Miller with something unspoken. Bailey stirred beside him, pressing closer as if sensing something familiar. Miller's throat bobbed. It's them. The confirmation sent a wave of relief through Lauren's body. They had done it. But before she could fully exhale, Patterson's voice sliced through the moment. So, you're telling me these mutts are actually military dogs? His arms were crossed, his tone unimpressed. I'll need more than just your word. Miller turned his head sharply, his eyes narrowing. He gestured to his team, and one of the officers stepped forward with a specialized scanner. We're about to confirm that, Miller said. The officer approached Duke first, pressing the scanner to his neck. A soft beep echoed through the quiet room, followed by a digital readout on the small screen. Miller leaned in reading it, then he nodded. Duke. U.S. Army K-9 unit, he announced, turning the screen toward Patterson. Serial number matches our classified records. Eric exhaled a breath of disbelief. It's real. Miller wasted no time and moved to Bailey, repeating the process. Another beep, another confirmation. Bailey. Also U.S. Army K-9, Miller said. They were a unit. Patterson let out a slow, unimpressed sigh. All right. So they were military dogs 7 years ago. He shook his head. That doesn't mean they're still useful now. Lauren felt something snap inside her. They're not equipment, she shot back, stepping forward. They're not useful, or not useful. They are soldiers. They dedicated their lives to service, to saving others. And when they needed us, we left them behind. Miller's gaze flicked toward her, something unreadable in his expression. Patterson rolled his eyes. That's touching, really. But it still doesn't change the fact that they're old, sick, and they were left for dead. Lauren interrupted, her voice stronger now. They were declared missing in action for 7 years. They've survived on their own. They didn't just sit in a shelter and wait to die. They held on. They had each other. A thick silence settled over the room. Even Patterson seemed slightly taken aback by the intensity in her voice. Miller cleared his throat. Dr. Carter is right. These dogs aren't just animals. They're veterans. And I can guarantee that if the men they served with knew they were alive, they wouldn't hesitate to take them in. That should have been the end of it. But then Miller hesitated, his face darkening slightly. The authority in his posture faltered for just a second. Lauren caught it immediately. What? She asked. Miller sighed. There's a problem. Her stomach dropped. What problem? He rubbed a hand down his face, looking genuinely frustrated. Because their records were classified and they were presumed lost, they aren't currently listed as active or retired K9s in our system. Which means there's no immediate placement for them. Lauren blinked. You're saying you might not be able to take them? Miller hesitated. Not today. Not officially. We have to go through the proper channels. Patterson scoffed. So, after all that, there's still my problem. Lauren gritted her teeth. Miller's jaw tightened. I'm not leaving them here, he said. Silence stretched between them. Then Lauren stepped forward again, her voice unwavering. They gave everything they had for us, she said. They fought. They bled. And they survived. And now we're supposed to just abandon them again because of paperwork? Miller met her gaze. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Because she was right. Then he turned to one of his men. Get on the phone. We're not waiting for bureaucracy. We're finding them a place tonight. Lauren's chest loosened with relief. After a few tense minutes, the officer returned. We have a solution, he said. There's a private, veteran-run facility that specializes in retired military dogs. They can take them. Now. Miller nodded. Good. He looked at Lauren. Dr. Carter, thank you for holding the line. Lauren felt a lump in her throat. She looked back at Duke and Bailey. Bailey had rested her head on Duke's leg again, but this time, something about them seemed lighter, like they knew something had changed. They were going home. Miller crouched in front of them, his rough exterior softening. You're safe now, he murmured. And for the first time in a long time, Duke wagged his tail. Lauren smiled, her heart full. She had almost lost them. But tonight, against all odds, they had been saved. The quiet hum of the retirement facility was a stark contrast to the chaos of the shelter just a day ago. The air here smelled different. Fresh grass, open fields, a faint scent of pine from the trees that lined the perimeter. This was a place of peace, a home for retired military working dogs who had given everything for their country. Lauren stood just outside the entrance, her hands loosely clasped as she watched Duke and Bailey settle into their new surroundings. The transition had been smoother than she expected. The moment their paws touched the soft earth, they had moved together, side by side, exploring the grounds with slow, deliberate steps. For the first time in 7 years, they weren't in a cage. Eric exhaled beside her. They look different here. Lauren nodded. They know something's changed. But there was still one final piece missing. Sergeant Miller had kept his word. He had done more than just find them a safe place. He had also tracked down the one person who had loved them first. Ryan Foster, a former K9 handler now retired from service, had spent the last 7 years believing that the dogs he had trained, fought alongside, and nearly died with were gone forever. Until yesterday. The facility's gates creaked open and a dark-colored SUV rolled through, slowing to a stop near the entrance. Lauren's heart tightened as the driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Ryan Foster was older now, more lines on his face, streaks of silver at his temples. But the moment Lauren met his gaze, she saw it, the weight of 7 years of grief. He hesitated, his hands resting on his hips as he scanned the field. Lauren stepped forward. Mr. Foster? His eyes flicked to her, distracted. Yeah, his voice was rough, hoarse like he hadn't spoken much today. Lauren swallowed. They're here. His breath caught. He nodded stiffly, but his movements lacked confidence, like he wasn't sure if he was ready. Lauren motioned toward the field where Duke and Bailey were resting beneath a large oak tree, their bodies close as always. They're older, she warned gently. Slower. But they're still. She didn't get to finish. Ryan had already started walking. His steps were steady at first, controlled, but as he got closer, his pace quickened, his breaths coming shorter. Duke lifted his head first. His ears twitched. Then Bailey stirred beside him, blinking toward the approaching figure. But there was no reaction, no excitement, no recognition. Ryan stopped a few feet away, his face falling. Lauren's chest tightened. They don't remember me, he whispered. She wanted to say something, anything, to reassure him. But what if he was right? 7 years was a long time. The world had been cruel to these dogs. Maybe it had taken too much from them. Ryan's jaw clenched. He rubbed a hand over his face, then took a slow, deep breath. And then he did something that made Lauren hold her breath. He squared his shoulders, his hands dropped to his sides, and in a voice both firm and familiar, he gave a command. Duke. Bailey. Front and center. For a moment, nothing. A heartbeat. Duke. Then Duke's body tensed. His ears snapped forward. Bailey let out a sharp inhale, her tail twitching. And suddenly it happened. Duke moved, slow at first, like his body was struggling to catch up with something his mind already knew. But then, like a switch had flipped, he pushed himself up, stiff, unsteady but determined. Bailey was right behind him, a soft whimper escaping her throat. And then they ran. Or at least they tried. Their legs weren't as strong as they once were, but it didn't matter. Because Duke was charging toward Ryan. Because Bailey was bounding beside him. Because 7 years of distance collapsed in an instant. Ryan barely had time to react before Duke barreled into him, the force nearly knocking him off balance. Bailey was there a second later, pressing herself into him, whining, her tail wagging so hard it shook her entire body. Ryan dropped to his knees, his arms wrapping around them both. I thought I lost you, his voice cracked. Duke let out a deep, rumbling noise, not quite a bark, not quite a growl, just a sound of knowing. Bailey nuzzled against his chest, her body trembling from the sheer force of her joy. Eric wiped at his eyes. I'm not crying, he mumbled. Lauren swallowed hard, but there was no stopping the warmth spreading through her chest, the sting behind her eyes. This wasn't just a reunion. This was home finding its way back. Ryan pulled back just enough to cup Duke's face in his hands. His fingers brushed over the scars that hadn't been there before, over the graying fur that told a story of survival, of years spent waiting. You waited for me, he whispered. Duke licked his hand, slow and deliberate. Yes. Ryan's laugh was half sob, half breathless relief. I should have come sooner, he said. I should have. Duke pressed his head against Ryan's chest. It wasn't blame. It wasn't regret. It was forgiveness. Bailey let out another whimper, pressing closer, as if she feared this was just another dream that would slip away. Ryan pulled them in tighter. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you both. And for the first time in 7 years they knew it was true. They were safe. They were home. And they were together again. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light across the open fields of the K9 Retirement Center. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, the leaves whispering secrets to one another as the day slowly faded into evening. By the edge of a quiet lake, just beyond the main facility, Duke and Bailey lay stretched out on the cool grass, their bodies finally at rest. The water lapped gently against the shore, creating a rhythm as steady as their slow, peaceful breathing. Beside them sat Ryan Foster, his arms resting on his knees, watching the water with quiet contemplation. For the first time in years he wasn't alone. The reunion had been emotional, overwhelming in a way he hadn't expected. He had spent so many nights haunted by the thought that his partners were gone, that he had failed them. But here they were, older, slower, but still them. And somehow, against all odds, they had found their way back to him. Lauren stood a few feet away watching the scene unfold. A soft smile played on her lips, though her throat felt tight with emotion. She had known that bringing Duke and Bailey here was the right thing to do, but seeing them now, truly home for the first time in years, made it feel even more profound. She didn't want to interrupt, but Foster turned toward her as if sensing her presence. He gave her a small nod, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, reaching into his jacket pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote this last night, he said, standing and stepping toward her. Didn't think I'd ever write something like this, but, well, I figured you should have it. Lauren hesitated before taking it, feeling the rough texture of the paper beneath her fingertips. Foster exhaled slowly. I don't say things like this often, but you changed everything. You saved them. And you saved me. Lauren swallowed past the lump in her throat, giving him a small nod before carefully unfolding the letter. Her eyes scanned the words, and as she read, her vision blurred with unshed tears. Lauren, I don't know if you believe in fate, but after what happened, I think I might. If you hadn't checked that microchip, if you hadn't followed that gut feeling, if you hadn't fought for them, I would have lost 2 of the most important souls I've ever known. For 7 years, I lived with the regret of leaving them behind. I told myself they were gone, but that didn't stop the guilt. It didn't stop the feeling that I had failed them. But they weren't gone. They were waiting. Holding on. And you found them. I don't think I have the right words to explain what that means to me, but I'll spend every day making sure they know how much they're loved, how much they mattered, and how much they always will. So thank you, Lauren. Not just for saving them, but for giving me back a part of myself I thought was lost forever. Ryan Foster. Lauren took a slow breath as she folded the letter, pressing it close to her chest for a moment. She had spent years in this job, making hard choices, seeing dogs come and go. But this story was different. This was a story about second chances. She looked back at Foster, who had returned to his spot beside Duke and Bailey. His fingers absent-mindedly ran through Duke's fur, his touch careful, reverent. Bailey sighed happily, stretching her legs before curling back into a peaceful slumber. The scene before her was something she wished she could capture forever. Duke and Bailey weren't just war heroes. They weren't just shelter dogs. They were survivors. They were family. And now they were home. Lauren turned her gaze to the lake, where the fading sunlight danced across the rippling water. Some stories ended in loss. Some in heartbreak. But this one ended with love. And somewhere in the quiet of the evening, where the past met the present, where sorrow turned into peace, two old soldiers, forgotten by the world but never by each other, finally found the rest they deserved. At its heart, this story is about more than just two old dogs. It's about loyalty, resilience, and the quiet sacrifices that too often go unnoticed. Duke and Bailey were once protectors, risking their lives for others, only to be forgotten by the very world they served. Yet, even in the face of abandonment, they never gave up. They held on to each other, surviving not out of instinct alone, but out of an unbreakable bond forged in trust and devotion. It's a reminder that true loyalty never fades, even when the world moves on. As the saying goes, no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. Lauren's decision to listen to her instincts, to see beyond what was written on paper, became the difference between life and death. It wasn't just about saving two dogs, it was about restoring dignity, honoring service, and proving that no life should be discarded simply because it is no longer deemed useful. In a world that often values convenience over commitment, this story stands as a testament to the idea that love is not measured in years, but in presence. Duke and Bailey were never truly lost. They were simply waiting for someone to remember. And in the end, they found what we all seek, a place to belong and someone who refuses to give up on us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow we have another special story for you. Until then, take care and remember, every life matters.